2000s, bro. In the early 2000s, man. Early 2000s. In the early 2000s, bro. In the early 2000s. Actually would not survive in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, bro. In the early 2000s, they were in the early 2000s. Early 2000s, bro. Early 2000s, he would be ran off the court. That dude would get ran out the league in the early 2000s. This dude would be ran out the league in the early 2000s.
What's up everybody, welcome back to All On Those Hoops. Recently we broke down the legacy of Ben Wallace, the undrafted underdog who became one of the greatest defenders ever. If you haven't seen that video, make sure to check it out after this one. But today we're diving into another star from the exact same era, a guy who doesn't get talked about as much, but for a few years was one of the best big men in the entire league, Jermaine O'Neal. Now if you've ever watched FlightReacts, you know he loves to hype up the early 2000s, and he always reminds people that the Pacers were tough back then, and it's true, Jermaine O'Neal was right in the mix during that time, going toe to toe with some of the best bigs in the league. But it raises the question, how good was Jermaine O'Neal really? Was he underrated? Was he just overshadowed by other stars of his time? And would he really take out all of today's big men? To answer that, let's start at the beginning. Jermaine O'Neal was drafted straight out of high school in 1996 by the Portland Trail Blazers, the same legendary draft class as Kobe, Iverson, Nash, Ray Allen. But unlike those guys, O'Neal barely saw the floor in Portland. He was stuck behind veterans like Rasheed Wallace, Artest, Sabonis and Brian Grant. For 4 years O'Neal was mostly an afterthought, but he was still developing, and by 2000 Portland had decided to trade him to the Indiana Pacers, a move that changed the course of his career. In Indiana, O'Neal finally got his chance to shine. The Pacers were transitioning, Reggie Miller was aging and the team needed a new centerpiece. O'Neal stepped up. From 2001 to 2007, Jermaine O'Neal was one of the best two-way big men in basketball. He averaged 20 plus points per game for 4 straight seasons, 10 plus rebounds per game in multiple of those years, 2 plus blocks per game regularly. He made 6 straight All-Star teams, was selected to 3 All-NBA teams, and even managed to finish 3rd in MVP voting in 2004, behind only Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan. That's how good he was at his peak. And remember, this was in the golden age of power forwards and centers. KG, Duncan, Shaq, Dirk, and Jermaine was right in that conversation. The highlight of his career came in the 2003-2004 season. The Pacers team coached by Rick Carlisle won 61 games, the best record in the NBA. With Reggie Miller regressing into more of a role player, the Pacers leaned on a gritty lineup featuring Ron Artest, Steven Jackson, Jamal Tinsley, and of course Jermaine O'Neal as the go-to star. In the 2004 Eastern Conference Finals, Indiana squared off against the eventual champion Detroit Pistons. O'Neal had his hands full going against Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace. The Pacers fought hard but ultimately lost the series in 6 games. Still, that season proved Jermaine O'Neal could carry a team deep into the playoffs as the number 1 option. Here's how J.O. did in that series. Game 1, 21 points, 14 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks. Game 2, 24 points, 11 rebounds, 2 blocks. Game 3, 10 points, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks. Game 4, 12 points, 12 rebounds, 2 blocks. Game 5, 22 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks. Game 6, 20 points, 10 rebounds, 4 blocks. For the series he averaged roughly 18 points, 10 rebounds and 2 blocks per game against the league's toughest defense. Unfortunately, after 2005, injuries started to pile up. O'Neal's knees couldn't handle the load he was carrying, and the infamous Malice at the Palace in 2004 didn't help either, as it derailed what could have been a dynasty run for Indiana. He still had productive years in Toronto, Miami, and even as a veteran in Golden State, but he was never the same All-NBA force he had been in Indiana. His peak, like Ben Wallace's, was relatively short. So, how good was Jermaine O'Neal really? At his peak, he was an elite two-way big man, one of the few who could give you 20 and 10 while also protecting the rim. He wasn't quite at the level of KG, Duncan or Shaq, but he was closer than people remember. He finished his career with over 13,000 points and over 7,000 rebounds with almost 2,000 blocks. He was a 6-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA. When it comes to rankings, as a defender he wasn't quite Ben Wallace level, but still top tier for his era. And as a center/power forward overall, he probably lands somewhere in the top 35 to 40 big men of all time. Not the very top tier, but certainly a star of the 2000s and one of the best players in Pacers franchise history. Unlike Ben Wallace, Jermaine O'Neal hasn't made the Hall of Fame, at least not yet. Some argue his peak was too short, but others point out his 6 All-Star appearances and MVP caliber season as evidence that he deserves a spot eventually. And thanks to FlightReacts constantly talking about the early 2000s, more young fans are remembering players like Jermaine O'Neal, stars who might not get enough credit today, but were serious problems back then. So, was Flight right to hype up Jermaine O'Neal? Absolutely. He may not have had the longevity of other legends, but during the early to mid 2000s he was one of the best bigs in basketball, carrying the Pacers to 60-win seasons, battling against Duncan, KG and Wallace, and proving he could be a franchise cornerstone. As a defender he was top tier for his era. As a big man overall he was elite, and not quite Hall of Fame level yet, but not far off, and certainly better than many people give him credit for. So that's gonna wrap up today's video. Let me know in the comments, where do you rank Jermaine O'Neal all time? How do you compare him to Ben Wallace, who we broke down in the last video? And please make sure to like, subscribe and stay tuned for more deep dives right here on Holo Nose Hoops. Thank you very much.